From within this world, may our despair be transformed to hope as we begin anew the legacy of caring. May that be our prayer, especially in such a heavy week, that our despair might be transformed into a legacy of caring by how we care for ourselves and for one another. I'm going to talk a little bit about a model of care, of how sometimes we need to make our circles of existence smaller and sometimes wider, depending on how we are doing. I will start by sharing how I dealt with this week. As Reverend Jean's death was a shock. Though I did not know her particularly well, I felt it at my core. It was one of those moments for me that made me so keenly aware of how tender and fragile our lives truly are, of how easily we can be alive in one moment and gone in the next. When even the most grounded, rooted, and steadfast amongst us, which Reverend Jean surely was, when even she can fall and have this end her life, it is a scary moment to be facing mortality that all of us in her community were perhaps faced with this week. And though we face this alone, we face this together as well. And we get to choose when we need to be alone and when we need to be with others. So when I first heard this news on Wednesday, as Raymond would attest to, I cussed in a very minister-like fashion out of shock, and I then stepped outside for a few minutes myself here at church, just needing some time to be alone. And a moment with the perspective of nature, of the trees still there, of the sun still shining. I then dutifully compartmentalized to do the work I needed to do, worked late, and on my way home, I felt like I needed to do something. I just wasn't sure what. Drive around for a bit, maybe. I wasn't sure. And then a name popped up on my phone. A friend and colleague who'd also heard the news called to check in, to see how I was and to see how she could help. I told her of my own shock, a bit of verbal diarrhea, and after I felt better. I had not known I needed a friend and a listening ear in that moment, and I am so grateful she reached out. We can always reach out and trust that the person will answer the call or read the text or not, whatever they are needing in that moment. Now, later that night, my partner and I went on our usual walk, and I found that my feet just were leading me to First UU. I needed to walk there to be outside in their space for a moment. And so we did, and I had a moment of remembrance and honoring. When I got home, I poured myself a little whiskey and cracked open a book about Richmond's unhealed racial history. Now, I have no clue if Reverend Jean drank whiskey at all, but it just felt right. A little bit of whiskey and a book on Richmond's unhealed racial history was my own little private honoring and vigil, my own time with Reverend Jean. Now, though I had my own quiet vigil for her and at First UU just a day or two before, when Friday evening came around for a vigil, in all honesty, I was just too emotionally exhausted to go and be with people. So I didn't go. I did what my body and spirit told me I needed to do, which was to eat a hamburger. Sometimes we know exactly what we need. We know we need a moment alone. We know we need to step outside and see that the sun still shines or the clouds still hide the sun from shining. Sometimes we know we need to just eat a burger, read a book. I wouldn't suggest eating a book, especially when you're not doing too well. Eat a burger or read a book and reach out to a particular person. Now, other times it might take some time to figure out what it is we're needing, or it might take a friend to present us some options before we know what we need. In all moments, whether of deep joy or sadness or all those in between, we will need different actions or responses at different times. I quote from Koheleth in the Hebrew Bible or Ecclesiastes in the New Testament, chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. There is, we know, a time for everything, a time to mourn or celebrate with others, and a time to just be alone. A time to be with friends or family or community, and a time to make space for your connection with the divine, if this is a relationship you have. There is a time to widen our connections and a time to narrow them. Sometimes we need to attend to ourselves. Other times we need support from others. Everyone copes differently, and this can change in different situations and times. But I want to explicitly state that it is normal and it is okay to make our world smaller when we are facing difficulties or in crises. All of our energy might be needed for one situation, and so we have to contain and preserve. This is normal, and it's normal to happen within a community and to a community. Sometimes we will need to make our world smaller, and other times we will have the capacity to make it much larger and to be present for others in our outside world. I ask you to take a moment and just think about the spheres and the circles of your life. You might imagine a bullseye of sort of concentric circles that are in one another. So that bullseye, that innermost circle, might be just you. What is in that next circle? It might be your closest friends or family members. And what's in the circle beyond that? The circle one larger. You can imagine where this is going. If you continue to draw circles and fill in who and what might be in these circles of existence. We don't really have time for everyone to draw their circles and share, though I would love that. And I will encourage you, if you think it would be helpful for you, to draw these circles. And I would ask you as well that if you have a relationship with the divine, where is this? In what circles do you encounter the divine? Where have they primarily resided in your life and in your past, and where are they now? I ask you too, how does this change in times of difficulty and joy? Does your own spiritual connection, does your concept of the divine move in times of joy and in times of crisis? This will help us to know what we might need when we are not doing so great, or when we are doing so well we are ecstatic and we're not quite sure to whom or to what to turn. When we are able to be aware and conscious of these circles of being, of relationship, of community, we're able to choose how we live, how we cope, and how we grow. We can ask ourselves, in what circles do we spend most of our time and energy? And what circles would we really like to be able to spend some more time in? What shifts might be needed to make this happen? We can sometimes, at least consciously, move within and between these circles of being, and they will aid our own introspection and relationships. We learn something from a relationship, and we turn into ourselves to reflect on what it is we might have learned from that person or event. So, there is a time for reflection, a time for relationship, and a time for action. A time to widen our relationships and perspectives, and a time to narrow, a time to focus, to preserve energy, reflect, or integrate these experiences that we've gained from our wider circles, be they grief or pain or joy or gratitude. Now, this tool, which maybe sounds kind of boring and overly fluffy, is not just a tool for personal living and pastoral care. In our current context, caring is actually sometimes social justice. We are valuing ourselves and our experiences over our productivity or efficiency. It gives us permission to slow down, to integrate and become more whole as opposed to more accomplished. It allows and encourages us not just to center ourselves and our own internal lives, but also our relationships and the lives of others. In a dominant culture that is very individualistic, we claim in these circles of being that our existence is not isolated, but rather interconnected. Out of our private despair, we transform ourselves and our world into a legacy of caring. Caring by honoring what it is we are needing in the moment, by honoring our relationships and being in relationship with others in our community. Now, I end by saying, luckily for you all here at UUCC, you are so good at caring. You know how to reach out to one another, to accept assistance and offer it, and you know too that sometimes people take a bit of space because they need it. You know how to welcome people back, and you know how to care for one another. This is such good news because right now, amidst so much grief, amidst everybody coming out of this pandemic, what our world needs is caring, is presence, is simply to be with one another. This, I believe, your bravery to simply welcome one another back, to be with one another, to truly listen to and care for one another, will also, I believe, lead you into being a transformed community. You will hear in these moments of being together what it is you all, your spirits and souls, yourselves, are longing for. And this commitment, this relationship, this learning you do when you listen to one another will allow you to embody that. I cannot know what you all will need, but I can trust that we will be able to be together, listen to one another, and to make that need a reality. There is a time for every season. May we be the individuals and the community that is aware of these seasons, aware of these needs, and can lovingly respond to what the moment calls for. May you give yourselves and others the permission to narrow and widen our circles of existence. May you allow your despair and your care to transform yourselves and the world. Amen. May it be so, and may we make it so.